Hi, this is The Greatest Story Ever Played. I'm Dan, and today I'm going to be talking about my 10 favorite books that I read in 2019. And this is really sort of a early Christmas gift, so to speak, of sorts. Last year I put this out right around Christmas, and I was intending to do the same thing this year. However, sickness struck the podcast and has delayed our release of the Life is Strange 2 episode we were planning to do. And so I just decided to move this up so that you still got something out this week. Like last year, I decided to do this because reading is a big hobby of mine in itself, outside of video games. I like to read, I like listening to audiobooks, it's my thing. And so last year, I put together a list of my 10 favorite books, and just put that out as kind of some fun content in December that is outside of video games, but you may or may not be interested in. And so I decided to do it again this year for 2019. Yeah, there's not really any video game content in here, so if that's all you want, one book's about video games that I talk about, but, otherwise not really much video game content here. So if that's not something you're into and you want to skip this one, totally cool, I get it. However, if you do want to hear my thoughts about 10 books I'd really like this year, then proceed. And kind of the structure of this is just basically, I tell you a little bit about the book, and then give kind of some thoughts outside of it. It's non-spoilery, so sometimes the thoughts could be a little vaguer, but, my hope is that maybe one of these books may catch your eye and would be something you'd want to learn more about or whatever. So that's kind of my thought in this. So I guess without any further preamble, we'll just get into my top 10. What I decided to do was just list them in the order that I read them. So in the beginning, that's books that I read in January, and near the end is books I probably read this month or last month. So it kind of goes that way. So I guess here we go. So, book number 1 is called Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. This is by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It came out in 2006, and it is, of course, a biography. A description of this book is, acclaimed historian Doris Kearns Goodwin illuminates Lincoln's political genius in this highly original work. As the one-term congressman and prairie lawyer rises from obscurity to prevail over 3 gifted rivals of national reputation to become president. On May 18th, 1860, William H. Seward, Salmon P. Chase, and Edward Bates and Abraham Lincoln waited in their hometowns for the results from the Republican National Convention in Chicago. When Lincoln emerged as the victor, his rivals were dismayed and angry. All right. So, this book is fantastic. Really, really, really good. Kearns is clearly a great historian. She knows her stuff like no other. She digs deep. Lots and lots of information is in this book. And you get a really good picture on Lincoln, who is, I don't know, arguably one of the most, if not the most, important presidents the United States has ever had. Hugely influential leader. And so you getting to see his rise and, coming to lead the country. You also get to see how he led. Something that's really unique in this book is those guys, Seward, Chase, Bates, who get mentioned. These are all guys who came from kind of different sections within the party, and all of them thought they would be president, and they weren't, and it was Lincoln instead. And what you have is Lincoln actually brings all of these people together who were his rivals and have them play key parts within the government that he has leading there. And it's pretty incredible that he's got these people who have different viewpoints, who were at one point in opposition to him, like, I would be pissed at the guy who beat me running for president. But Lincoln instead is able to turn these people into allies, into friends, into working together. And how Lincoln relates with them and stuff like that. It's really, really fantastic. Like, as a picture of leadership and of an important person in history, like, this book really sells it. It's really cool. As a side point, this book's not in my top 10, but I read another book called Lincoln's Melancholy, and so it's about how Lincoln had kind of a depressive type temperament and stuff like that, and yeah, what his inner life was like a little more too. And Team of Rivals gets this some, but Lincoln's Melancholy itself, that book also got in there. And just seeing this, I don't know, really important man who lived through history, or who led in history and was important. So yeah, highly recommend it. It's very, very good. And Lincoln's Melancholy was pretty good too. It wasn't top 10 good, but I did think it was a good book and was pretty engaging. Lincoln's important. If you want to learn more about him, Team of Rivals will give you a very thorough knowledge, and you could feel, good knowledge if you decide to go for that. So, yes, that's book 1. Book number 2 is called The Culture Code: The Secrets of Highly Effective Groups. This is by Daniel Coyle. It's a business book, and it came out in 2018. A description for this book is an essential book that unlocks the secrets of highly successful groups and provides readers with a toolkit for building cohesive, innovative culture, from New York Times bestselling author of The Talent Code. So what this book does is you get sort of a survey of qualities as to what makes the best companies, why are they that way, certain values they hold, and then there's lots of stories scattered throughout expressing this greatness. And so you get to see really cool things like that, what a good company culture looks like, how they treat their employees, the values they have, stuff like this. I found this book pretty striking. It really stood out to me, and it was really desirable to say, I would love to be on a team like this. That was kind of what it really drew from me. I would want to be in a culture like this. And they had examples like Pixar, I think, was one of the companies in there. Google was in there. Different things like that. And just seeing that they treat their employees and stuff like that. You're an adult. You can solve things that we don't even know about, and you have the freedom to do it. Like that sort of attitude. And yeah, it really struck me. I really, really liked it. It was thought-provoking as to what good culture looks like and different stuff like that. So, and just as this might not sound like a book you'd like to read, but I'm kind of a nerd for business culture or culture and good groups and success, and I like it. I think it's fun. It's engaging and stimulating to my mind, and so I like reading businessy books like this. So that's kind of what led me here, and I was very stoked. I thought it was real cool. All right, book number 3 then is Blood, Sweat, and Pixels: The Triumphant and Turbulent Stories Behind How Video Games Are Made. This is by Jason Schreier. Genre, I guess, video games, really. And this came out in 2017. A description for this book is: developing video games, a hero's journey or a fool's errand. The creative and technical logistics that go into building today's hottest games can be more harrowing and complex than the games themselves, often seeming like an endless maze or a bottomless abyss. In Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, Jason Schreier takes readers on a fascinating odyssey behind the scenes of video game development, where the creator may be a team of 600 overworked underdogs or one solitary geek genius, exploring the artistic challenges, technical impossibilities, marketplace demands, and Donkey Kong-sized monkey wrenches thrown into the works by corporate. Blood, Sweat, and Pixels reveals how bringing any game to completion is more than Sisyphean. It's nothing short of miraculous. This book really provided great insight into how video games are made. The structure of the book is they take 10 games and give you a chapter on each one and get some behind the scenes in them. Uncharted 4 was one of them. Star Wars 1313 that never came out is one of them. Stardew Valley is one. I forget the others offhand. But it's very good. It was cool getting to see this. I would think of anyone who listens to this podcast, this book is probably for you, because you already like video games. For me, I think Uncharted 4 was the only game I'd played that they talked about, and I still enjoyed hearing about the other 9 quite a lot. Also, enough so, I actually recorded a bonus episode fully on this book about Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. If you go to our website, go to the blog part, there's a section called bonus episodes, and there is a link to the Blood, Sweat, and Pixels episode. What I decided to do for that is I think I talked about 5 of the games. I didn't want to go in depth on all of them or spoil the whole book for you, but I did talk about 5 of the games that stood out to me and kind of what happened in that process and that kind of thing. So bonus episodes then, there will be a spot for Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, and there'll be a link to it on YouTube, or I think just as a direct download kind of thing. So I did record an episode, it's just not on the main feed, but definitely check it out if you want more on the book. I highly recommend it. All right, next up is The Long Walk by Richard Bachman, a.k.a. Stephen King. Richard Bachman was his pseudonym he used back in the day before someone figured it out. And this book is, I guess, technically a horror book. I would say it's, if dystopian counts as a genre, I think that would also fit, but, whatever. It came out in 1979. The description for this book is, on the first day of May, 100 teenage boys meet for a race known as the Long Walk. If you break the rules, you get 3 warnings. If you exceed your limit, what happens is absolutely terrifying. So, this is a really good book. I would say this is one of Stephen King's best books, which is very impressive. That it's an old one that he published under a pseudonym, and it's still one of his best. It's very good. So, as you said, 100 Teenage Boys, The Long Walk, and what it is you need to keep walking until there's one person left walking, and if you slow down too much, there's consequences. It's intense. It's super intense. I think that even this was a mistake, that this somehow was not turned into a movie during the Hunger Games craze. It 100% fits the teen dystopian kind of thing, except it's darker. Like if studios were like, hey, let's make a rated R Hunger Games and put it out around then and be like, this is R, but like it's the same idea. The Long Walk would be that book, is that book, and would be that movie. I was a big fan of it. I read a lot of it actually while I was on a plane, and it kept me engaged and didn't make me feel like I was flying, which was great. Very good book. Yeah, it was quite good. I hope a movie does get developed of it. I think it would be pretty tense seeing as kids don't make it on the Long Walk, and as it goes, like, it'd be pretty intense. So I would be pretty into that. I hope it happens. It's good. And it wasn't too long. This was a pretty short book, maybe 300 pages or something. So it was pretty doable. So yeah, check it out. It was fun. If you like dystopian stuff, this would be yours. If you like Hunger Games or books like that, this I think would be in your wheelhouse as well. All right, next up, I've got A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This is a fantasy book. It came out in 2011. This is book 3 of the Game of Thrones series. So, or A Song of Fire and Ice series, I should say. And description is, of the 5 contenders for power, one is dead, another is in disfavor, and still wars rage. Alliances are made and broken. Joffrey sits on the Iron Throne, the uneasy ruler of the 7 kingdoms. His most bitter rival, Lord Stannis, stands defeated and disgraced, victim of the sorceress who holds him in her evil thrall. Young Robb still rules the north from the fortress of Riverrun. Meanwhile, making her way across the blood-drenched continent is the exiled queen, Daenerys, mistress of the only 3 dragons left in the world. And as opposing forces maneuver for the final showdown, an army of barbaric wildlings arrive from the outermost limits of civilization, accompanied by a horde of mystical others, a supernatural army of living dead whose animated corpses are unstoppable. As the future of the land hangs in the balance, no one will rest until the 7 kingdoms have exploded into a veritable storm of swords. This is great. I don't know. Some of the best stuff from Game of Thrones is in this book from the TV show. I'm not going to cite anything, but I think that this book roughly aligns with like season 3, season 4 of Game of Thrones, which is definitely when Game of Thrones was especially good, the TV show. But it's great. It's really good. I don't know. I don't think I can praise this series enough. It's so enjoyable. Last year I talked about the first book, I think. But they're great. It's so fun. If you're like me, I always want more on characters. If you're like, I wish I could see this character more on the TV show. The book, you get more. You get everything. And it's quite enjoyable. So, yeah, if you like the show, I recommend reading the books. All right, and I guess if not, it's just really good. All right, on to the next one. This is called Station 11. This is by Emily St. John Mandel. It's a science fiction / dystopian style book, published in 2014. A description for this is it's set in the days of civilization's collapse. Station 11 tells the story of a Hollywood star, his would-be savior, and a nomadic group of actors roaming the scattered outpost of the Great Lakes region, risking everything for art and humanity. One snowy night, a famous Hollywood actor slumps over and dies on stage during a production of King Lear. Hours later, the world we know will begin to dissolve, moving back and forth in time from the actor's early days as a film star to 15 years in the future, when a theater troupe known as the Traveling Symphony roams the wastelands of what remains. This suspenseful, elegiac, spellbinding novel charts the strange twist of fate that connect 5 people: the actor, the man who tried to save him, the actor's first wife, his oldest friend, and a young actress with the Traveling Symphony, caught in the crosshairs of a dangerous self-proclaimed prophet. And for this book, I think the best way I could describe it is it sort of feels like the novel The Stand by Stephen King, which is about a pandemic, meaning Pulp Fiction, the Quentin Tarantino movie. So you've got all these kind of like time hops going on, different timelines, different characters interacting, that kind of thing, like in Pulp Fiction. But you have this pandemic type setting where the world's wrecked and, what happens after the world's moved on, sort of deal. And it's pretty cool. I like this quite a lot. I was really engaged just hearing the stories of the characters, having this traveling troupe of actors and musicians. That was pretty interesting. That's pretty reminiscent of a lot of like fantasy novels and stuff like that, where you have like a troupe of people doing stuff. So that was kind of cool. You have that, but it's, they were in modern times, but then modern times died, and now it's after kind of thing. So it was pretty cool. I enjoyed this quite a bit. This book is also fairly short. I would say pretty accessible. So yeah, if you're not trying to pick up a monster but you want a fun read, I think that would be a good one. All right. Next up is a book called Heaven by Randy Alcorn. I guess genre, this would be religion. It came out in 2004. A description for this book is, what is heaven really going to be like? What will we look like? What will we do? Won't heaven get boring after a while? The premise for this book basically is Alcorn uses the Bible to answer different questions about heaven. And he just expounds on them and is like, here's what the Bible says about what heaven will be like. And then we'll answer things like, will we have pets? Or are you married? Or, I don't know, different stuff like that. And I found this pretty good because, I don't know, I would be afraid a book like this could be pretty fluffy or just kind of, here's what I think, or something like that. And he does differentiate between when it's like, this is my opinion, or, based on what the Bible says, I think this, or whatever. So I thought it was pretty good. And he's a Christian, so he writes from that perspective. So as a heads up, if that sounds like something you would like, I recommend it for sure. I guess I'll move on to the next book, which is called The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. This is by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. This is, I guess, a psychology type book, and it came out in 2018. A description for this book is, the generation now coming of age has been taught 3 great untruths. Their feelings are always right, they should avoid pain and discomfort, and they should look for faults in others and not themselves. These 3 great untruths are part of a larger philosophy that sees young people as fragile creatures who must be protected and supervised by adults. But despite the good intention of the adults who impart them, the great untruths are harming kids by teaching them the opposite of ancient wisdom and the opposite of modern psychological findings on grit, growth, and anti-fragility. The result is a rising rates of depression and anxiety, along with endless stories of college campuses torn apart by moralistic divisions and mutual recriminations. So, This book, The Three Great Untruths, as they said in the description, this is really the foundation of the whole book. It gets brought up in the introduction, then they go through them, and they really bring out a lot of examples of how when people believe these things, that it seems like it would be helpful, but it actually hurts you. So you should avoid pain and discomfort. The age-old saying that you've probably heard is, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Instead, what they put forth is that people now are starting to believe what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. That it's bad for you to go through trials, bad to go through adversity, or whatever. Or, if there's a problem, then it must be other people, and not necessarily, there could be a problem within myself that could be a part of this, that kind of thing. So it encourages different reflections, I guess, is what I would say. And I found this book really, really thought-provoking, just thinking about how people interpret things, or how I interpret things, different stuff like that. Of course, like any book, I don't agree with everything in it, but I did think it was thought-provoking. They do a pretty good job, I thought, of going after kind of the far left and the far right of political viewpoints or whatever. They hit them both. It didn't feel like it was like only going after one way of thinking or something like that. It instead was like, here's a scope of how this applies and that kind of thing. So I thought it was thought-provoking. I think that it is very much so worth reading, even if you don't agree with what they say. I do think it's worth reading just in kind of seeing what they had to say. And that's what I found for myself. I saw several things I was like, yeah, that's a really good point, and other things where I was like, I don't know about that. But in a lot of ways, I did think there were good things to take from it, and really ultimately that ideas in your mind and stuff like that, that's pretty important. Yeah, being able to have it challenged and consider through things and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's that book. If that sounds like something you might like, I recommend that. Next up is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a fantasy book. It came out in 2007. Told in Koth's own voice, this is a tale of a magically gifted young man who grows to be the most notorious wizard of his world has ever seen. The intimate narrative of his childhood in a troupe of traveling players, his years spent as a near-feral orphan in a crime-ridden city, his daring, brazen, yet successful bid to enter a legendary school of magic, and his life as a fugitive after the murder of a king form a gripping coming-of-age story unraveled in recent literature. So that sort of sets the stage for this book. This is part of a trilogy. 2 of the 3 books are out. The third one is not out yet, so we're waiting. And this book, specifically, it felt a lot like a mix of Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones. So, as mentioned in there, there is this wizarding school where you can learn about magic and stuff like that. That whole section felt a lot like Harry Potter. It felt very reminiscent of being at Hogwarts in some ways, except it's a lot more R-rated. It's more violent and shit like that. So that's kind of where the Game of Thrones comes in for me. It also is kind of set in a more Game of Thrones time. It's not like modern England or something like Harry Potter. It's set more in that time period, but it's cool. I really, really like this book. Of fantasy novels, I would say that this is pretty top tier. It was quite good. I highly recommend this. If you like fantasy, I would suggest going with this. And even if you were like debating between this and Game of Thrones, if you've watched the Game of Thrones series, I would maybe start reading Name of the Wind series instead. Or the King Killer Chronicles is what it's called. But I would maybe even start reading those just because you will be not familiar with them versus Game of Thrones, which if you watched it, then you would be. But it's very cool. I liked it quite a bit. Good fantasy series. Yeah, quite enjoyable. And my final book is called How to Be Yourself. Quiet Your Inner Critic and Rise Above Social Anxiety. This is by Ellen Hendrickson. I guess this would be technically like a self-help book. Came out in 2018. And a description for this book is up to 40% of people consider themselves shy. You might say you're introverted or awkward, or that you're fine around your friends, but just can't speak up in a meeting or at a party. Maybe you're usually confident, but recently have moved or started a new job, or only to feel isolated and unsure. If you get nervous in social situations, meeting with your partner's friends, public speaking, standing awkwardly in the elevator with your boss, you've probably been told, just be yourself. But that's easier said than done, especially if you're prone to social anxiety. All right, so just a couple thoughts on this book. One thing is I felt very understood by this book. In the book, she goes through lots of examples of social anxiety might look like this. If you're feeling anxious, you might do something like that. There were multiple times in the book where I just laughed and I was like, yep, I've done that. Or, yeah, I do that when I get anxious. I felt very understood. When I was reading, I was like, I feel seen. Like, I appreciated that in that it wasn't, like said in the description, oh, just be yourself. You'll be fine. It's like, that doesn't feel like real advice. That doesn't feel helpful. You're like, that's the problem. That's how that can feel sometimes. And this book instead, I felt very seen. That was good. But it went much further than that. It helped me recognize patterns. I have something that goes in through there. In the book, they talk about our safety behaviors. So what do you do when you feel anxious? Do you, just play on your phone, or do you actually leave the situation, or do you end up drinking too much alcohol, or whatever, a variety of things. And what was great is when she brought up the safety behaviors, I could see them, but then what she also did was she provided real solutions as to, okay, well, here's what you do next. Like, here's what it's like to challenge your safety behaviors. You're feeling awkward, well, do this thing instead, or do that thing. So it was pretty helpful, because it wasn't like, here's 3 ways to fix you, or something like that. Instead, it was like, hey, yeah, I get it. I understand the feelings you might have, whatever. Here's maybe things you might be reflecting out to others you may not realize. And, okay, here's some ways we can work on this. Here's how we can see growth. Here's how we can see some change here. And I really, really like this book. As you can tell, it being on the list and how I'm talking about it now. It felt super helpful in just being able to engage in social situations I would be afraid of, and that was something that was good in this book too, is something that's scary for you might not be scary for me, but then something scary for me might not bother you. And that sort of thing. So she really hits that stuff up quite a bit, and it's really good. It's really good in that regard. I really like this. This book itself might be my favorite one that I read this year overall. This one, or probably Coddling and the American Mind. Those two both really stood out. But yes, I found this quite helpful in that regard. Also, there's a book I read a few years ago called Quiet by Susan Cain, and so she talks a lot about being an introvert and stuff like that, and I would say that this is a good follow-up, in a sense, or a second book to pair with it. So if you are introverted or socially anxious, or you just want to or quiet, that sort of stuff, and you want to just deep dive in that, I highly recommend reading Quiet by Susan Cain and then picking up How to Be Yourself by Ellen Hendrickson. They're both very good, really helpful with navigating that stuff, and that being quiet isn't a weakness necessarily, but it is if it prevents you from doing the things you want, or that sort of stuff. It's pretty helpful in navigating all of this. So yeah, definitely recommend it. Really, really enjoyed it. And that's our last book, actually. So yeah, I guess if you have any books that you really like this year, I'm always looking for recommendations, so please message me, or write below on the comments on Twitter or whatever for this. I'm totally interested in hearing what you're reading and what you like. I hope these books seem cool to you. I hope there's one that sounds like something you might want to check out. Otherwise, please write into us at TheGreatestStoryEverPlayed@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at StoryEverPod. Our website is TheGreatestStoryEverPlayed.com, and as I mentioned earlier, you can go to the bonus episode content to get the Blood, Sweat, and Pixels there. If you'd like to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, that would be super helpful in increasing visibility for the show and getting to enjoy video games more together. And if you'd like to financially support the podcast, you could do that by going to patreon.com/TheGreatestStoryEverPlayed. We have monthly Patreon exclusive episodes that come out that are on just different video gaming topics. So if you'd want to check that out, we'd super appreciate that if you want to financially support us. And yeah, thanks for hanging out, and we will see you next time.